What's up, everyone? Rasheen Barber here, Wrestling with Change coach. This is the first Your Story in regards to wrestling. And my guest today, I'm certainly appreciative of him taking the time out of his super busy schedule to relay his story as it relates to the pro wrestling business. Um, Today we have John Alba. He is a host of multiple podcasts on the wrestling scene. He is also a star. You have to tell me, John, if this is a reach. He's a star on the.
You said star right there. That's the reach as is. There you go.
He's a star on the independent wrestling scene. In a former life, he's also Emmy-winning producer. Also, notably in my research, I found out probably a little bit more prestigious than the Emmy. It was the winner of the 2018
the
Harry.
Harry Award.
Yeah,
That was a big deal. That was a
yeah.
big deal.
So there was when I saw that, I was like, oh, I got a good friend of mine, a running buddy who his nickname is Dewey. So me and my buddies, we gave him a nickname, call him PD. So which stands for perfect dew, because his hair is always
There you
immaculate.
go.
And I have to admit, as much as it's going to upset my friend, you're not giving him a run for his money. You're taking his money.
Damn right. Damn right. A lot of work that goes into this, man. There's no doubt about that. You know, you got to adapt with the times. I recently changed over from hair cream to mousse. It was a big pivotal moment in my life. So yeah, it's things are definitely, I work with Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy's a serial reinventor, I like to call him. I got to reinvent too, and that's my way that I do. So yeah, man, no, I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, man, welcome. So as I mentioned, this is the first Your Story, and really the premise behind this was I'm trying to talk to different people in the business, whether it be people who are in the ring, behind the scenes, whoever, referees, and get their story. Because for me, professional wrestling goes back for me as far as I can remember, 4 or 5 years old. It's been a big part of my life. And I didn't really pay attention.
Was life still in black and white at that point, or had you forget I'm a heel here?
Yeah. I forgot. You totally went heel on me out the gate. So you know what? Probably was.
Okay, gotcha.
I probably was. So I know you're a little bit younger than I was, but yeah, it really played a big part in shaping my life. I didn't really understand that until I got a little bit older. But that's really kind of the premise on this, and just want to try to dig into your story as it relates to wrestling. And like I said, you're a super busy man, so there's a lot of different places we can go. But first, I just want to start off with, how did you get into wrestling? What was your first memory of getting into the sport, the business, I should say?
Yeah, my first memory when it comes to really being captivated by pro wrestling was, if I can get the date right, I think October 5th, 1997, which is the
Bad Blood.
Bad Blood Hell in a Cell match. And
Yeah.
that's got to be Kane, right?
Yeah.
So I remember seeing that as a little kid. I was watching, I believe, with a neighbor. That's a larger than life character storming onto your television set. As a young kid, you're captivated by that, right? Like, this is the era of really bad Batman movies and stuff like that. And I see a character like Kane, and he fits right in that world. He's a better character than half of the characters in the bad Batman movies, but still, the premise sits, right? So that was where I kind of was first. That was my big bang, I like to call it. And that eventually led way to becoming a pretty diehard fan during the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars, or as Eric Bischoff tells me, I have to call it the Nitro Era. So it was during that time I really caught fire, like a lot of wrestling fans out there. I started covering pro wrestling when I was about 17, 18 years old, just writing for websites. Then I was interviewing Billy Gunn. I was a sports director in Bangor, Maine, and I was interviewing Billy Gunn for my newscast at a one-man show he did. And he came up to me and he said, you have a very punchable face. I said, okay. He says, nah, man, you can make money off that. So 7+ years on the independent circuit later, here we are now doing everything that I'm doing in this wild world of pro wrestling.
Yeah. So that Bad Blood, the Hell in a Cell match is obviously a classic. It's not even just a classic match; it's a classic storyline.
Yeah,
Like just
story, moment, everything.
yeah, the build and everything like that. At the time when you were seeing it, did you have a full understanding what was going on? Or did you have to go back and kind of pick up that?
I knew what I was watching wasn't real, but I was still fixated by it. It was flashy, it was colorful, it was impactful. I didn't have full context, but I recognized what I was watching was a significant moment. So I think that's where it really all triggered for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for me, and you mentioned the Attitude Era, that was really kind of like the start of it. So like for me, that's like high school time. Before that, like the 94, 95, like wrestling was not in a great place. It was just,
wrestling was lame.
yeah, it was really bad. And so you didn't want to admit that you were a wrestling fan during that period of time. And
yeah, because you were out there buying Mantar shirts at live events. That's the problem here, man.
I wouldn't even go that far. I definitely wasn't talking about it. You know what I mean? But the Attitude Era ushered in something different, and took wrestling back into the mainstream after it had been out of the mainstream for 10 years, if you consider kind of Hulk Hogan era. When you kind of look back on that, who were some of the characters and the wrestlers that you kind of gravitated towards?
There were four guys that I always point to from that era. I was a WWF guy. I was not a WCW guy. I grew up in the Northeast, so WCW wasn't really something that resonated with me all that much. And then plus, as I started to get more into wrestling, that was as WCW started to kind of take that dip. So I wasn't really paying too much attention to WCW at the time. Obviously, in hindsight, I've gone back and pretty much watched the entire Nitro era. But my four guys were The Rock. Everybody loved The Rock. Who didn't love The Rock? Kurt Angle, Matt Hardy, and Kane. Because Kane was the Big Bang moment there, but
yeah.
Matt Hardy and Kurt Angle were two of my guys, and now I'm grateful to call them coworkers.
Yeah, which has to be super super cool.
It's extremely gratifying, and especially with Matt, because the Matt podcast is my brainchild. That was my baby, and I pitched that to him and made the connection, and now I legitimately would say that Matt Hardy is one of my closest friends. Yeah. So growing up seeing that, and for that transformation to happen, there are many things in my career that I regret. I don't know how long my career will go in broadcast or wrestling or whatever it may be, but just to be able to say at the end of the day that I gained something like that out of my career is all the fulfillment that I'll ever need.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super cool. You mentioned those four names, right? And certainly iconic names, and not to take away from Matt Hardy, but obviously Matt came up with his brother Jeff and a tag team. But then you've got The Rock, Kurt Angle, Kane, individually, right? Just very iconic figures. What made you, or what was it about Matt that kind of stood out where you put him on that list?
Sorry that I'm like sucking down iced tea as we do this. I don't drink coffee, so any type of caffeine or anything that I can get down.
I'm the same.
What I need, but is either that or the Jameson. I don't think I'll be doing that on here. So, no, with Matt, and I say this all the time, I always felt like Matt was the secret sauce of the Hardy Boys. Jeff was the rock star. Jeff was the guy that probably stood out a little more on the marquee. But Matt is the guy that made everything make sense in the ring. Matt was the brains of the operation. I don't know if you're a music fan or a rock and roll fan specifically, but I always look at AC/DC, Angus Young and Malcolm Young. Angus Young's the one up there, the lead guitarist, doing the duck walk, doing all the soloing and everything. That's the Jeff Hardy. But Malcolm Young was the forefather of rhythm guitar. He was the one holding down for it, making sure that the rhythm backed everything in order for the lead guitarist to have his moment. So that's how I look at Matt Hardy in that context. And I've always looked at him that way for some reason, even dating back to when I was a kid. And I just resonated with that. I've never been someone who loves necessarily being the star, but I love being able to support and help make that machine run. And I feel like that's where Matt always was. And that's not taking anything away from Matt, because man, 99% of pro wrestlers would love to have a career like what Matt Hardy's had. But that's just how I always viewed him in that context.
Yeah, Matt can go. Yeah. It's just,
and look, Matt changed wrestling with the Broken Matt character. Broken Matt legitimately shifted the timeline of professional wrestling as far as cinematic matches, character study. He changed the game in that sense.
And he's underrated in that regard.
Extremely.
He doesn't get the credit that he deserves.
Very much so.
Like, that was when he started doing that. I wasn't really heavy into Impact. I kind of started gravitating away from it. And then I was hearing about this Broken Matt Hardy, and I'm like, what is this all about? And when I first saw it, I was like, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but it's different.
Brother, when you see that WrestleMania return and you got 70,000 people chanting delete, something that wasn't on WWE TV, it was on this company on a channel called Destination America and Pop TV, and you got 70,000 people chanting it, you're over. Yes. It's as simple as that. You're over.
Big time. So one of the things that you were saying there is really kind of interesting, just kind of like not being at the forefront, and you talked about that relationship between Matt and Jeff. And how do you, when you look at other things that you've done in your career, how much of you think that had an impact on how, things played out, not only in the wrestling business, but also, being a sports broadcaster?
I mean, that's hard, because in sportscasting and TV news, there's very much an individual element of what you do, right? You're live on air hosting a show alone. So you have to be the guy who's up front doing it. And I don't back away from that. I love performing. I love being in front of a camera, talking. That's not an issue. But when I know that I'm contributing to something that's bigger than me, I take a lot of pride in that. One of the nights that changed my career was covering, I mean, you live in Florida, the Daytona 500 is a very big deal there, and internationally it's a big deal, obviously. And I covered the 2020 Daytona 500 where Ryan Newman flipped at the finish line and he nearly died. And I was on air like 11 times that night across the country doing live shots. And it was a night that changed my career, because it taught me how to really get myself in the moment to talk about a very heavy subject and to be vulnerable and real on camera. And being a part of our breaking news coverage that night, a central part of it, but contributing in a way that made our entire team coverage better, that was really something that struck with me. So I think that if there are ways I can contribute in a meaningful way to a team, like how I feel like I'm trying to do right now with what I do for a living, that's great. If I can compliment Matt Hardy and allow him to help tell his stories, if I can compliment Diamond Dallas Page and Jake the Snake Roberts to help them tell their stories, or Arn Anderson or whomever it may be, then I feel like I'm doing my job. And it's the same for managing on the indies too. The manager is the side piece. They are there to accentuate the talent. So that's a very fulfilling feeling for me.
Yeah. So I guess it's, when you, again, just going back to Matt and the role that you saw that he's played in the Hardy Boys, the role that he's played in the wrestling industry. When you take the sports Emmy, what you're doing now at free shows, what you're doing on the independent scene, it's kind of, to me, it kind of speaks to that producer role, which is what you won the Emmy for. Anything that else, as far as you were coming up, as you hit high school years, when you looked at wrestling and parallels to your life, were you able to see any?
I always loved wrestling growing up, but wrestling wasn't my first love. Baseball was. So, and like right there, but I leave it behind me all the time because it's a reminder of where my path kind of went through the dynasty Yankees are what really made me want to become a broadcaster. And I remember April 98 turning to my mom watching a Yankee athletics game. It was 17-13. The final score was the home opener for the Yankees that year. And if I don't know if you're a baseball fan, but the 98 Yankees were one of the greatest teams ever,
Oh, yeah.
period.
Yeah.
So, and I remember turning to her and I said, I want to be the guy that talks about that for a living. So, sports, traditional sports, were really what drove me to pursue broadcasting more than anything, truthfully. And wrestling, I always just kind of viewed as a hobby.
Hmm.
And as I became more involved in news and storytelling and doing feature pieces, it allowed me to get a better understanding of the storytelling techniques that go into pro wrestling. And then working on the indie scene, a lot of what I learned from working on the indie scene, especially as I was starting, isn't just like the X's and O's of pro wrestling, which sure, that was very valuable for me to learn. But seeing up close in person firsthand how a match is put together, how you fit little storytelling devices in each match, how you utilize storytelling devices that I learned in TV news in developing characters in professional wrestling. Those were the areas where I was able to create that crossover. And I think because of my background in TV, because of my background in storytelling, it has allowed me to find a level of success in professional wrestling that some others who may be trying to do similar things that I do, maybe they don't have that degree of knowledge because they didn't have that outside the bubble experience. I say this all the time, and I don't necessarily mean it in a negative context. There can be a negative context to it, but pro wrestling is very much a bubble. There are people who are in the bubble that never leave the bubble. And then there are a few people every now and then who come from outside the bubble into the world of pro wrestling, like what Tony Khan has done. And there are other, Freddie Prinze Jr. when he was writing for WWE. I feel like I came out from outside the bubble, and that has allowed me to view wrestling in a different context.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, as you were talking, I was thinking like for for me as a fan, um, I think when I was young, you understood that there's a story that's trying to be told.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't necessarily fully understand like how intentional it is, right? Like you're saying, you're an independent scene learning like these little intricacies of storytelling. Um, and as I've gotten older and wrestling has lifted the veil more and more with documentaries and podcasts and things of that nature, I appreciate the story more than I did as a kid. For you as someone who is not only a fan but participating, like how much of that is like when you turn on the TV, how much of that is what you're looking for? Or, sometimes I think there's some people that want to just be strictly entertained, right?
Yeah, there are. And sure, I mean, we all want to be entertained at the end of the day by
Mhm.
whatever form of media that we watch, whatever it may be, TV, film, comic book, anything. We want to be entertained at the end of the day. Whether you like comedy, horror, action, you want to be left entertained. That's why
Right.
we've looked for these other outlets in our life. For me, when I watch pro wrestling, I do believe I watch it a little differently than a lot of people do. And I kind of watch pro wrestling like a pitching coach would watch a pitcher, and they're breaking down little details that they see, and they're trying to make sense of why did this happen here? Why did that happen there? And that can be from a storytelling standpoint, or I really like to micromanage the in-ring storytelling specifically. I do tape study every single week of wrestling. I will watch a match that aired on TV that week. I'll watch a match that aired 7 years ago. I'll watch a match that I wasn't even alive for, because I try to pick up little things within it that make me better at talking about professional wrestling. There's a lot of work that goes on in preparation for what I do and what people in my industry do. So it's a lot more than just throwing on my microphone and hopping on air and talking about it. So I do all the research for Matt's podcast in particular. So I will spend days researching each topic and trying to produce things for him that allow me to sound smarter talking about them, you know?
Yeah. How many times have you like gone back on matches that say like for example you mentioned Bad Blood. For me, like one of the matches I remember as a kid that left an impact on me, and then I've gone back and watched it a few times and watched it differently, like you're talking about, is the um, I Quit match between Tully Blanchard and Magnum TA,
Oh,
Starcade,
wow.
in a steel cage. Just phenomenal storytelling in that match, just within that match, and they had a great build to it, which because wrestling was kind of televised a little bit differently back then. Maybe didn't get to see all the build, but you kind of understood what was going on going into that match. How many times have you done that where you just kind of think about like, I really love this match as a kid, but now in what I'm doing now, the space what I'm doing, let me go back and look at this differently.
Yeah, if there are matches that I really loved growing up, I generally try not to watch them until it's time for me to do something with it. Like Matt and I just did an episode on TLC one. TLC one is a match I've seen a million times in my life. The Hardy Boys were my team. I've seen the match a million times. That was the height of my wrestling fandom. TLC two is probably my favorite hardcore match ever. So I've seen those matches a million times, but I didn't want to watch TLC one again until it was time to prepare for this because I really wanted it to feel fresh when I was watching it from an analytical perspective. So even though I knew we were going to talk about TLC one dating back to last September, I knew that, hey, let me wait until the week of the match to watch this. That it's going to make sense for me to break it down and keep it fresh. But there are, it can be arbitrary, like last week it was the anniversary of Bailey versus Sasha from Brooklyn, and I was at that match in person. So I've seen it a few times since. I remember thinking it was one of the best women's matches I've ever seen at that point. So I was like, all right, let's do a tape study of it. Let's take a look back on the anniversary of this. And it was great. I loved watching it back. And I actually did a Twitter thread about it. I picked out specific moments. And I don't know. I try to keep some things fresh, but then there's also going to be matches that I've maybe never even seen before. And I'll go and just study. So I think something I learned, again, I don't know how much of a traditional sports fan you are, but my mentor in the broadcasting industry is Ian Eagle, who is one of the greatest play-by-play guys in the world, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And he taught me at a very young age, I was 16 years old, he taught me that pre-production is production. The work you do beforehand is going to reflect the work that you put out. So the more tape study and the more research that I do into my projects, the smarter I'm going to sound and the better that the people I work with are going to come off as a result.
Yeah, for sure. We want to get into just your independent wrestling career, because for me, I, I look at that and I'm like, man, that's really compelling and really interesting. Just kind of your overall journey, not just your wrestling journey, right? To end up in that kind of space, and we hear about it all the time. Like there's wrestlers that come from all different spaces. We a lot of times we hear about the people who wrestled collegiately or were athletes in other sports and they come in, it's kind of a natural thing a lot of the times. But we also hear about these stories of people who are just like bagging groceries at the grocery store and someone comes, you got the look, and they come down and they give it a shot or whatever. um, when you decided to make that leap to actually be an on-screen talent, to get in the ring, to take bumps, to be a manager, like how much of a shift was that for you?
A shift in what sense?
The shift in terms of like you're going from being because you're already doing the podcast at that point. You're already been in broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
Those are completely different,
Yeah.
just professions. And wrestling is very unique in so many different ways. It's to me, it's one of to me it is the best art form. And if you don't really understand it, you don't understand it's not just the physicality, it's the theater of it. It's acting, it's tugging on people's heartstrings. It's so many different elements of it that make it so great. How was that, different for you, or what was the adjustments that you really had to make as you transitioned into that space?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much adjustments. I always have been a performer my whole life. I've played music. I was in a band for years that I traveled all around in. I When I was 3 years old, I was doing the Wizard of Oz for my parents. Like I was always a performer. And broadcast, there's an element of performance involved with that. So transitioning into wrestling and the talent side of things, part of it was to get my rocks off as the performer, but the other part was to learn about the industry. And man, did I just learn so much. I feel confident right now, and I'm sorry if this makes me sound like a D bag or whatever, but I feel confident right now. I could lay out a professional wrestling match, a compelling professional wrestling match.
Yeah.
I've wrestled maybe 6 matches in my life,
Yeah.
and none of them have been a singles match. They've all been either battle royals or handicap matches or tag matches, whatever. Where I'm the guy who's in there to do a few spots, and that's that. But I feel like I could lay out a singles match right now for you, a 15-minute singles match, because I now understand what goes into a match and the storytelling involved, and how you get to the heat, how you get to the cutoff, how you get to the shine, all that stuff. So it really wasn't so much a difficult transition, but I definitely went into it with an open mind. I don't think I ever, and you'd have to ask the people I've worked with, obviously, if they agree with this or disagree with it, but I don't believe I ever stepped really out of place. I always made it very clear that I am the manager. I am there to accentuate everyone else's talent. I'm not going to get in the way of you guys telling your story. You do your thing the way that you need to do it. So yeah, that was kind of the approach that I had, and calling wrestling too, doing play by play and color commentary for wrestling was a great way to learn. So I think those things combined, it really wasn't a terribly difficult transition, but it was just one that I tried to make sure that I learned a lot about. And now I'm kind of stepping away a little bit from the indie scene. I'm now utilizing that knowledge. There's not a whole lot more for me to gain right now from that. I've gained what I've needed to. And when the time comes, I'll do more stuff. But right now, I'm doing some coaching with the Monster Factory near Philly, which is super fun. But aside from that, I'm pretty content with what I've been able to do in indie wrestling.
Yeah, I just I admire and respect like that, the ability to just kind of step in there, right? And like you said, your
Thank you.
background made you comfortable in that space. I do have to ask. This is just really more for me than anything else, because I've always been super curious about it, but I don't think I want to put myself through it. That first bump that you took, how jolting was it?
Um, you know, I have a little bit of an outlier experience, because the first ring that I ever trained in was just horrible. It was a boxing ring that they were using as a wrestling ring, and a boxing ring is not meant to be
Right, to take
bumped in.
bumps.
So my experience was probably not as great as most people. Like, taking your first bump sucks no matter what, but I think mine was a little more accentuated in that sense. But what I will compare is last year I wrestled in a 4-on-4 tag match, and it was the most extensive wrestling thing I've ever done in my life. We spent 6 months building to this match, and I knew that I was going to have to go in there. The plan, at least, was initially I was going to go in there and I was going to do some actual wrestling. So the day before, I got into their little training school ring, and I did 7 hours of training. I was initially going to do an elbow drop in the match, and it got cut right before we went out there. So I did like 40 elbow drops the day before for no reason, and I was so sore. It's one of those things where it can take your breath away a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's addicting. It is very much addicting, and I understand when wrestlers get the bug and they can't quit it. I understand it. This past weekend, as we taped this, I took one of the most vicious bumps on my life. One, I came off the top. That wasn't too bad, but I got Northern Lariat from behind, and he just laid it on me. And sometimes you just have to suck it up, you know?
Mm.
He literally just texted me an hour ago and goes, how's your back feeling, man? So yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. The only thing I think I can equate it to is, I played high school football, and I will never I always distinctly remember waking up Saturday morning in my bed just stiff, and then
Yeah.
finding out that I can't remember who I heard this from, but it was like playing a game of football is like the equivalent of being in a car wreck.
Yeah. And I think I felt that way after the training day. One thing you don't think about a lot in the nuance of pro wrestling is that you are essentially teaching yourself to not catch yourself when you fall.
Mm,
It's human instinct. If you're going to fall, you're going to try to put your arm down, or you're going to try to brace yourself for a fall. You can't do that. In
yeah.
fact, you'll hurt yourself if you try to do that. So, you're coming off the top rope, your instinct is going to be to try to land on your feet, but you can't. So it's just as much up here trying to trick your brain. And that I found to be very difficult.
Yeah, man, more power to you, man. Like I said, when I was doing research on you, that was like, out of all the stuff that you've done, I think I was more impressed by that. I was like, this guy's out here taking bumps, man. Like,
Yeah. And a lot of the bumps that I take, unless I'm like really, really nervous and I'm like, I want to make sure we get this, I'll say to the guys, just lay it in me and I'll do my thing. Like, I don't want to practice it ahead of time. Like this past week when I was being thrown off the top into a rocket launcher doomsday device, like I knew that I had to throw my arm out coming off the top, and it was gonna be a long way down. So I didn't want to practice that, because if we practiced it, then I'd be getting in my head of how am I gonna fall here, all that. I said, let me feel the energy of 600 people just going nuts during this moment. And when we get to the top, I said to the guy who was launching me, I said, just yeet me, just heave me. And I know how to fall. I'll do it. I'll nail it in the moment. And we
oh
did.
boy,
So that
that's
was like, I went up to the top before we did anything. Like before the show, I went up to the top just to get an idea of what I'd be looking at, what I'd be dealing with. And I didn't take the bump after that. I just got right back down. I just said, when we get to the moment, just guide me and I'll take the rest and I'll
that's
roll
big.
out. So
That's big time cojones, man.
you
And
have to, but again, it's performance. And I feel like when you do performance, performers live for that stuff. They live for the adrenaline rush. They live for that moment.
yes.
So there's a little Matt Hardyism. You live for the moment, right? So that's how I approach that stuff. And I did a show a couple months ago in the ECW arena, and
Oh
bumping in the
wow,
ECW arena was,
surreal.
I never would have thought that would be something that I would ever do in my life.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's surreal stuff, man. Let me ask you this. Um, in your involvement in wrestling, whether it's uh, podcasting, commentating, being in the ring, managing, whatever, what has been your biggest challenge as it comes to the business?
I think my biggest challenge, and this kind of stems from mental health stuff and all that. There's two elements. The travel is really difficult. But aside from the travel, imposter syndrome, feeling like you
Mm,
don't belong and you don't deserve to be in those spots. Like, who am I? I'm not a trained pro wrestler. Who am I to be kind of thrown in these spots with sometimes pretty knowledgeable guys, whether it's in the ring or doing a podcast with them or whatever it may be, feeling like I didn't deserve that opportunity. Now, I've worked very hard for what I do, and I recognize I've worked very hard. But I think it's natural, especially in wrestling where there's so much ego, it's natural to feel like you don't necessarily belong. So trying to reinforce that to myself has been a little bit of a challenge at times. But there's good days and bad, just like anything. So yeah, that's probably been the biggest challenge I've had.
what's been what you found to be the best way to kind of overcome that, or have you had like someone in the business been an advocate that kind of helped you navigate that?
I think I just watch a lot of tape and I try to do my best and I watch all my stuff and say, what can I do better? All that. And you just try to prove that you are improving and you're doing better each time you're out there. And what I always say to the guys that I work with, especially on the indie side, is that I'm always trying to do right by you. I always want to make you so I'll be a little annoying sometimes when they'll give me my spots for the match or if I'm pitching spots for the match that I'm going to do distraction spots or whatever it may be. And I'll ask them a million times, okay, so it's after the cutoff, you're hitting a suplex, that's when you want me to grab your leg. And I'll say it over and over just because it's so important to me that I nail it. Not for me, but for their story.
Right.
And I do think that while it can be annoying, I think people appreciate the fact that I care so much to make them look good. So that reinforces your involvement more than anything.
Um, so I guess one of the biggest things that I hear in that is like, yeah, imposter syndrome over here, but what allows me to kind of push that to the background is, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, like understanding you're part of a bigger picture here, like focusing on what you need to do so you can trip. And again, I said this earlier, I think wrestling is the greatest art form there is. And when wrestlers are in there and they're doing their thing, and then you also have managers and referees, like they're contributing to this,
Yeah.
this group painting.
Yeah.
Right? Like everyone is pitching in to make sure that this painting comes out
Yep.
and is a masterpiece every single time
Yep.
that they go in there.
Camera people, commentators,
Yeah.
referee, timekeeper, ring announcer, everything. Everyone's contributing.
Yeah, I had a chance to go to Raw here in Tampa. I guess it was about a month ago, and I don't know how you are when you're at events. And this is just for me in general. I'm a huge rap music fan, so it doesn't matter if I go to a concert. It doesn't matter if I go to a wrestling event, whatever it is. I'm the low key guy. I'm not standing up cheering. I don't care if I'm front row surrounded by people who are yelling and screaming. I'm the guy that's just like taking it in. And I went with my wife because I don't have many friends that are wrestling fans. Like no one in my family, none of my close circle of friends are wrestling fans. I have like one or two friends that I talk wrestling with. And so I'm there and my wife is just like, "You're not having fun?" I'm like, "Oh, this is awesome." Because I'm trying to pick up on every single little nuance that's going on. What's the broad, because it's different when you're there live and you're not listening to it, watching it from on TV, right? Because you don't have the benefit of listening to the commentary team. You don't have the benefit of certain cut shots. You have one perspective there. So to kind of try to take everything as it's happening there live is different from watching it on TV. And just really just trying to like soak in like the whole experience, because especially with WWE, it's like a full on production, right? Um, when you watch wrestling and as it relates to things that you're doing on the independent scene, you mentioned like you're in front of a crowd of 600. I'm at this WWE event is probably 12, 15,000 maybe. How much of it is like, maybe trying to put yourself in that spot as if there were more than 600 people there, like from a theatrical standpoint, does it even really matter?
No, I mean, I think you're saying from a performing standpoint.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from a performing standpoint, if I have 10 people that are invested in what I'm doing, then I'm going to go out there and do it for those 10 people.
Yeah.
So again, that's where that adrenaline rush, that high that a performer gets. Man, listen, 500 people is a lot of
A
people.
lot.
It's a lot of
For
people.
sure, for sure.
I mean,
That paid.
the first indie shows I was working were 20, 30 people.
Yeah.
And even then, you find something to love in it because it's like very DIY and homegrown.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, a lot of the indie shows I work now have 3, 4, 5, 600 people. And in a small VFW, 3, 4, 500 people, it sounds like a lot.
Oh
So
yeah.
this past weekend, the show that I worked, we paid off a year and a half long story that was told. And there was a moment, the climax, where I was going to be thrown in that doomsday device I was telling you about, when the guys looked at each other and visually they cued to the audience of what was about to happen, and the crowd realizes what's about to happen. I hadn't even gone up to the top rope yet, but the crowd realizes what's
They
coming,
know, yeah.
and they start stirring, and they start getting out of their seats, and they start hooting and hollering. Boy, that is the biggest rush you're ever gonna have. So, and I'll never forget, after it will literally sit with me for the rest of my life. After I hit the doomsday device and I rolled out of the ring selling, I sat there on the ground. I was holding my arm over my face, and I couldn't stop smiling because there was like a pause in the match at that point to let the crowd soak it in, and they were just going nuts. They were stomping, and that's what wrestling's all about, man. That's that great art form that you keep talking about. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how big the audience is or what the size of the arena is. It's when people care, and more than anything, when people feel with what they're seeing. That's what storytelling's about, and that's what great pro wrestling is.
Well, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think everyone, most fans will have their own kind of definition of what professional wrestling is. I don't know if you listen to or follow Jim Cornette or not, but you know, he's seems like, I guess it depends on your perspective, but it seems like he's always ranting and raving on what wrestling is and what it isn't. And he's entitled to that opinion, certainly because he's been in and around the business for a very long time. Um, but yeah, I would say, like I said, to me as a fan, it is those moments that you were just talking about, like the build of a storyline, and just really capturing people's like attention and their emotions and taking them on that ride. And it doesn't, I guess maybe one of the disappointing things is, you know, not everything can be perfect. So it doesn't happen for every match that you watch, even the ones that you anticipate that it's going to happen in. But when it does, it's like, that's, you know, as you were talking about as a performer, it's the same thing as a fan. That's what keeps you coming back, even in those lean years where you're just like,
Yeah. Well, and I say it all the time, pro wrestling is at its best when you're rewarded for paying attention. And I think great storytellers do that in any form of media. When I was in TV news doing feature stories, that was always something that I would try to incorporate into my stories. I would introduce a theme in the beginning of a piece, and I would pay it off in the end of the piece in just about every story that I did. So I feel like in pro wrestling, if you can do that, and the fan sees that you're rewarding them for paying attention to the story that they just watched, there's no better feeling than that.
yeah,
That doomsday device I've talked about, that was like the group that I managed finisher, and it was a year and a half long story, and to the point, and these are the small details I think about when I'm laying out a match and helping people lay out a match. The corner of the ring that we did it in was the same corner that the first time everyone saw it
wow,
happened in. Those small little things that on the surface you might not think about,
right.
but then you juxtapose it in your mind and you're like, oh, wait, that's a really cool callback. Those are the small things that I love about storytelling.
And those are the things too, where sometimes as a fan, you don't pick up on it, but maybe you pick up on it through like
Maybe a little
still
later you do.
photos
Yeah,
or
see
video
some photos, someone else
packages.
brings it. Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. So then you're just able to like, oh man, that is really cool. So you know, it's like one of those things where even if you don't catch it in the moment, if you catch it later on, it's still just as cool.
No doubt.
All right. So a couple of things not wrestling related that I wanted to get into. I was watching an interview that you did. Uh, I'm not sure when it took place, but
Me
so
neither.
I the biggest thing that stood out to me, I was like, oh, this guy is a foodie like me. So one of the terms that came up was brownie slut.
Caramel, the salted caramel slut. Yes, yes.
And then, you know, love for Asian food, Italian
My
food.
salted caramel
Yeah,
whiskey right
there
here.
you go,
There you
your
go.
whiskey, barbecue. Like, talk to me about that because I,
I'll
you
get
know,
your honor here.
appreciate that. So I was talking to my wife a couple weeks ago.
I did that solely for you, not for me at all. Okay.
It's a sacrifice. I
Yeah.
appreciate
I was
that.
willing. I was willing to make that. So you're talking to your wife. Go ahead. Sorry,
So I'm
I'm being
talking to
rude.
my wife, and I was telling her, I was like, as a kid, I'm an only child, so I don't have any brothers or sisters. During the summer, if I wasn't outside playing, then I was inside. I was watching TV, and once I got my own TV in my own room, one of the things I gravitated to in terms of daytime television was these TV talk shows that, I'm sorry, TV cooking shows.
Hmm.
It's people like Graham Kerr, Julia Child, like these old school people, and then just TV network comes along.
Emerald.
Yes, Emerald Lagasse, right? He's the first kind of like big time star or of that generation. Like for you, how did you get to that point where you just became like infatuated in
Yeah.
love with food?
I love lifestyle stuff. I really love lifestyle stuff. If I could have any job in the world, it would be being Guy Fieri. Like what he does, I think is just the greatest job in the world. How
It's
could
dope.
you beat that?
Yeah,
That's not, I mean, it's work, but it's not work. That
right.
is, you are going around and it's storytelling in a very different way. So, and I've auditioned to host shows like that before. It's the coolest thing ever. So I think food for me became very innate to me. My mom is a tremendous, tremendous cook, tremendous, especially when it comes to like Italian food. She's on another level. So over the years, I observed and everything, and she's never given me a cooking lesson in my life, but I've seen her so much that it was just a quality that I kind of picked up, and I love cooking. I will sit at 2 a.m. and watch smoking videos on how to do a 3-2-1 rib method. And that's probably what you did too, right? Yeah. So I do that all the time. I literally just did it maybe an hour before I hopped on with you. I was watching a different type of thing because what cooking does for me is, again, and I relate this a lot back to mental health stuff. Cooking allows me to focus. It doesn't allow me to focus, it makes me focus.
Right.
So by having to focus, it forces my mind to let go of some of the other things that may be affecting me. And it takes me in a very intense state where I just have to be all in on something. So that's what cooking does for me. And plus, if you do it well, then you get to reap the benefits of it. So yeah,
Facts.
like just bought a sous vide. I'm all in on the sous vide,
Ooh,
all that kind of stuff.
okay.
Man, like I'm in. I watch, I don't know if you've ever seen Guga on YouTube, but he does awesome, awesome steak videos. And he also has a channel called Sous Vide Anything, which
Oh
I
wow.
just picked up, and I made a sous vide steak last week for my buddy, and it was unbelievable. So I was like, well, and there's a gratification from that, right? And
Yeah.
being part of the team, like I said, where if I'm cooking for people, I feel like I'm doing something that's contributing. So
Yes.
I
Yes.
I, I don't know, I get enjoyment out of that.
Yeah. I did my first tomahawk steak
Oh,
on the
very nice.
grill.
I've never done a tomahawk steak, but I absolutely plan on doing it.
Oh man. If you and so here's the thing, right?
I watched a
It
video on smoking a tomahawk steak last night, but go ahead.
really?
Oh yeah, I'll link you.
Okay. So here's the thing with tomahawk. So my parents were in town, and my parents, whenever they're here, they do a lot of walking because that's how they get their exercise in. So they walk up to the grocery store here. My mom comes back. She said, "Hey, they got tomahawk steaks on sale." She tells my dad. My dad's all in, right? Because my dad's a big barbecue guy. He's probably got like 3 or 4 grills at home. And he's like, "Hey, we're going to get these tomahawks. You guys want one?" And I've cut back on my beef intake over the years, but I still will eat a really good steak. So, my dad's like, "Hey, I want to get a tomahawk for me and your mom. You want to get one for you?" And I was like, "I don't know." It's like a really expensive cut, and like, my family doesn't really eat beef like that. And I was like, "Sure, do it." So my dad's driving me crazy for 2 days, asking me how I'm going to marinate my steak and how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to cook it, and all this other stuff. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little intimidated. Like that's a really good cut of meat.
Yeah,
It's expensive. You want to do it right. If you jack it up, like this is money
that's
down the
it,
drain.
right?
And it was. I went to a local butcher here and got like it's kind of like a coffee rub,
Interesting.
and did that for like I think I let it sit for like 2 days,
Oh
and
wow.
threw it. It's the hottest I've ever got my grill. I got my grill up to like almost 600, 650
Oh,
degrees.
geez.
Yeah, it was scorching. And threw that bad boy on there for a few minutes and then finished it in the oven. and got it up
Oh, you did a
to,
little reverse sear.
yeah, yeah. It was, I highly recommend.
Very
Highly,
nice. It came out
highly
great.
recommend.
That's awesome.
Yes, yeah, highly
I don't know
recommend.
if I would go coffee rub person. I'm not, like we said, I'm not a big coffee guy.
Yeah,
But when it comes to steaks in particular, I really like to keep it simple: salt, pepper, maybe garlic powder, and that's it.
yep.
I don't, because I feel like steak, when you cook steak well,
You don't have to do
the
anything.
natural flavor. I mean,
Yep,
that's all you need, right?
yep.
So the sous vide steak, man, I don't see myself cooking steak any other way from this point going forward.
It spoils you.
Perfection. Because with sous vide, and I wasn't expecting to be talking about this, but I'm thrilled to be talking about it. With sous vide, you get an even cook the entire way through because it's in a bag that is vacuum sealed in hot water, and you're never going to go beyond the temperature that you set the water at.
Right.
So if you're trying to cook a New York strip in sous vide, 129 degrees, 2.5 hours, the whole thing is going to be 129 degrees. And then you just take it out, dry it off, quick 1 minute sear on both sides. You're done. It's the easiest thing ever, and it's fan freaking tastic. So you're not going to be able to sous vide a tomahawk, but
Yeah.
the other cuts you certainly can.
Oh man, God, it sounds phenomenal. All right, John. First, I just want to say I'm really, again, I mentioned this earlier, I'm super appreciative and grateful.
Of
Um,
course. Thank
One of
you.
the things that I have been able to really internalize over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years is how valuable our time is. It's, our most precious commodity. So when I reached out to you, you're like, sure, I'll do it. Like you don't even understand how much it meant to me. So that's the biggest thing. I want to make sure I get that away. Make
I
sure that
appreciate that.
that you understand how appreciative I am of your time and coming on and
No,
doing this.
the thing is too, Rashim, like when I was a kid trying to, because again, I knew what I wanted to do when I was 5 years old. So I was doing online sports talk radio when I was in eighth grade. It was horrible. It was
Wow.
terrible. But if I could get a guest on, it made me feel so valued and fulfilled. And so I never forget that feeling. And any way that I can ever pay it forward to people, I'm flattered that people want to talk to me. Like I don't, I know I'm an interesting guy. I recognize I've had a very unconventional life, but I still can't fathom wanting to talk to me. So I do appreciate you being vested in that, and thank you for supporting the projects that I work on and etc.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next thing. I was going to go to you. Just kind of tell us about where we can find you, what you're working on. I know you got something coming up this weekend. You announced, I believe, on the Matt Hardy podcast. It's a first in the wrestling industry, so I'll let you talk about that and kind of expound on that if you want. But yeah, tell us where we can find you. Tell us what you're working on. What's in the
Sure.
future.
Yeah, so obviously I've got the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy, which drops every Friday, which that's kind of my bread and butter show. This coming weekend, All Out Weekend in Chicago, I'll be there for Top Guy Weekend for ad-free shows. But on Saturday, the Wrestling Showcase is going to be on Fight TV, and that is a one-night bracket-style tournament that is going to crown the first ever Wrestling Showcase champion, and I'll be doing sideline reporting for it. It's a role that I've had in my back pocket for years that I've pitched to just about every major pro wrestling organization, and nobody's bid on it. And I can't believe nobody has bid on it until now because I watch a lot of sports, and a huge part of sports television presentation today is the role of the sideline reporter, where they are taking you inside the game and offering something different that people aren't normally getting. So, for the first time ever, to my knowledge, I don't think it's ever been done before in wrestling. You're going to have a sideline reporter on a broadcast. It's not a backstage interviewer. You're going to see me ringside. You're going to see me out there and taking you hopefully inside some of these matches in a way that will help tell these stories unlike any other presentation before in wrestling. So I hope we can pull it off. Fingers crossed on that. Yeah, man. Just other than that, keeping busy doing like my 14 shows that I do or whatever. I don't know. So yeah.
No, man, that sounds pretty cool. I don't know if I'm going to check out the show or not. Obviously, you said All In is that same this coming weekend, and we were talking before. I got kids, so how I consume wrestling is probably different from how you consume it. Um,
I watch way too much pro wrestling. Don't worry about it, man. You're good. You're good.
so you're watching a
I
lot.
envy you to a degree. Trust me. Like I don't envy the raising a little kid and all that, but I do envy. Sometimes it's nice to be able to step away and not do anything. Yesterday in my travels, I was supposed to just go from Boston to Jersey, but a friend of mine was in Rhode Island and living near Newport, just on the marina. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna drive there and I'm gonna soak in the air and the sea and
Yeah,
not think about pro wrestling, not think about sports, not think about anything. I'm just gonna take in the ocean air. And it was
absolutely. You got to.
delightful.
Yeah. Oh,
So
you have to, man. But yeah, I was like, man, I don't know if I because my wife, she'll recognize like a lot of times if I'm watching something, it's usually wrestling, and it's because I can't watch it when it's on because we're either eating dinner, I'm doing something with my kid, or whatever. So a lot of times I have to watch stuff like after the fact, um, recorded DVR, whatever the case may be. I wanted to see, like, for example, I wanted to see the Vacation Land cut, right? Because I knew you're going to be participating in that. I had it all set up on my laptop, ready to go, and then life just smacked me in the face, and so I didn't get to
well,
see
it's
any of
okay. The
it.
stream died after our match, so it's totally fine.
Shut up! Are you serious?
I mean, my match got shown, so I was happy about it. But there was a technical difficulty in the venue, and the stream was cut off. But it will be available on replay shortly, so the whole
Yeah,
show will be there.
so I'm gonna check it out on replay. I may have to do the same thing with Wrestling Showcase.
Yeah,
But I wish you the best in that. I wish you the best in everything that you're
thank
doing
you,
going forward, because it's people like you and that are in the industry that, for me as a fan, keep me vested, keep me interested,
thank you.
allow me to see things and think about things differently in terms of the business and continue to evolve, as a fan. So, I wish you the best, and
Thank you.
not luck, because you sound like someone who prepares, and if you're preparing, you don't need luck. You just go out there and you just knock it out of the
I
park. So,
appreciate that.
anything else before we get out of here,
Don't sweat the petty things and don't pet the sweaty things.
man? Will do. I appreciate you. That was John Alba, your story. First ever episode. So you made history with me today. And again, I can't thank you enough, man.
I've had the best hair of any guest in the history of this program. I
And
appreciate you.
I don't think anyone's going to top that.
All right, that's what I like to hear. Thank you, Rasheem. Appreciate
All
it.
right, man. All right. Have a good one.
You too.